Welcome to another in our Sacred Calendar series. It's very obvious that Christians use the year as a way of celebrating their faith. With me today I have Dr. Andreopoulos from the University of Winchester, who is an Orthodox deacon and who's going to speak to us about how the Orthodox churches view the year and time as part of the reality of the sacred. Andreas, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's always a joy to come in dialogue with you.
Tell me, could you give us a brief overview of how the Orthodox churches look at the year?
There are several different calendars that we use at the same time. It would take another discussion to talk about time in general, about past, present, eschatology, and the kingdom of God. So we're not going to do that now.
Okay.
But let's talk about the year, about the liturgical year. How many liturgical years do we have? We have one axis, as it were, which revolves around Easter. First, we decide when Easter is, which may not always be the case for East and West. First, we decide when Easter is, which may not be always the same date for East and West. And then we calculate other feasts that precede it or go after it, such as Pentecost, such as Ascension, such as mid-Pentecost. Then we can see something about the liturgical calendar Then we can see something about the liturgical calendar here. When do we celebrate Christmas? What else is happening before or after? What are we celebrating on the 25th of March or the 25th of January or any of these days? And another level of the calendar here, is the weekly calendar. What do we celebrate on Monday, Tuesday, every day in the week, on Sunday? And of course there's another cycle, because we're talking about liturgical cycles actually. On every day we still use the system of the first hour, the third hour, and as you do as well, of the ninth hour and so on. And our prayers are following this format. So let's talk a little more about the first two cycles, Easter and the calendar year. The way that we started calculating Easter when we did, both in the East and the West, doesn't differ very much in its philosophy. We both follow the same formula, in theory at least, which is the first Sunday after the first full moon, after spring equinox, unless, of course, that feast falls on Jewish Passover, in which case it's postponed 1 week. Now, whether we apply this principle in exactly the same way is not necessarily very important. And there are at least 2 Orthodox churches that I know of in Finland and in the Bahamas, strangely, that have received the permission to celebrate the Western calendar. And I also know that the Catholic Church of Greece is allowed to celebrate Easter with their Eastern brethren. So I think both sides are willing to see that this is the day that we decide when Easter is in some ways, although tradition is very important for us. And the symbolism is very important, why that particular time of the year. Now, why that particular time of the year? Easter is the first, perhaps the only feast whose real place in the calendar year we know from biblical sources, because we can calculate when the Jewish Passover was. Of course, the tradition that celebrates on the 14th of Nisan, which according to Western calculations was on the 25th of March, according to Eastern calculations was on the 7th of April.
one set of Western calculations.
That is true. And that you'd think, well, what is it? What else does it show us? It's a funny way when the church started placing other events in its liturgical life, starting from this one date that we're given historically. Now, the early church saw the connection between the tomb and the womb. The same day that Christ entered the tomb, the day when we're celebrating Passover, made sense to them that it was the same day that he entered the womb of the Theotokos a few years before. So that's where we get the celebration, the origin of the celebration of the Annunciation, which is referred to in the early church as the incarnation, rather than the nativity, which is the manifestation of the incarnation to the world. That's where we get the 25th of March as the day of Annunciation. And working forwards 9 months, we also get the day of the nativity.
So Easter is the absolute centre. You then work back and say the first Easter was the 25th of March. Then you go tomb, womb. Therefore, the Annunciation is the 25th of March. And then that moves forward and that gives you Christmas. So, right, yeah.
Yes, this is the way that we can trace this thought in the early church. What confused matters, well, several things confused matters, that there were several ways in the East and the West to calculate equinox and what we do, although the principle was the same. What was the principle actually? Why that particular celebration? Why that particular day? That is the day when light becomes stronger. The first full moon after the spring equinox is when light conquers for the first time over darkness. And of course, both for the East and the West, after the 4th century, it has to be on a Sunday.
So then Easter, the day of Easter, and then you move forward from that and you get Ascension, then you move forward from that and you get Pentecost. So you're following the timings from the book of Acts. Do you have a period like Lent in the West?
We do have a long period of Lent, which is not just 40 days, technically speaking. We calculate several weeks that prepare us for the Passion Week and Easter. But even before the start of the strictest fast, we have 2 more weeks when we prepare for the preparation, as it were.
So there's, as it were, pre-Lent and then Lent.
That's right.
Okay. Now, then let's move forward to Christmas. Christmas, the manifestation, the birth. Is that preceded with a period of preparation?
It is. We still keep Advent Lent in the Orthodox Church, which is calculated as exactly 40 days before the date of the Nativity itself. Although the fast is a little more relaxed than Great Lent before Easter. Great Lent is still quite heavy, and many Christians in the East still try to observe it as much as they can. Well, how heavy is it? We're abstaining from meat, fish, dairy, eggs, oil and wine, but we do get permission for oil and wine on weekends. Technically speaking, actually, our Saturdays are not completely within Lent, unlike your Saturdays.
Well, our Saturdays are completely in Lent, but our Sundays are outside Lent, which is why our Lent begins in the middle of a week. And then after Christmas, what feasts have you?
After Christmas, we celebrate the baptism of Christ on the 6th of January, which in the early church was the date when Christmas was celebrated as well as Epiphany. The earliest meaning of Epiphany was the manifestation, the revelation of the glory of Christ to the world, the revelation of the public glory of God, as it were. And that, in a sense, included 3 different things, both in the East and the West. The Nativity, the baptism of Christ, and the veneration of the Magi. Two of these events separated in different ways in the East and the West. So in the East, we celebrate Christmas on the 25th of March, along with the veneration of the Magi, whereas the baptism stayed on the 6th of January, unlike in the West, where the
Yes.
veneration of the Magi stayed with Epiphany on the 6th.
So the 25th of December is both Nativity and Veneration,
It is.
and 6th is baptism.
6th is baptism of Christ.
Just one last question. As you go through the year and you meet Saints' Day after Saints' Day, how important are the Saints' Days in the Orthodox year?
Just a few years ago, for most simple people who didn't have an immediate need to know that today is the 5th of May or the 23rd of December and so on, they would remember time. They would have an understanding of the passing of time through celebration of saints.
So in a sense, the celebration of saints formed a map over the year which allowed people to know before and after.
That is exactly it. And that is also something else, that the commemoration of saints is not only a commemoration of time, but also one of the simplest prayers that we can find in the East. Some of the simplest people go to church, and if they do not know any other prayers, they just stay at a corner and they say names of saints. That's a simple prayer which connects us with the other side and reminds us actually that there's no other side.
Andreas, for that very brief but very succinct overview of how the Orthodox churches look at the year, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's always a joy to come here.